Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No Never. I'm your host, Chananya Abraham, and thank you so much for joining us today. I had on a good discussion where I really learned a lot. I mean, just the concepts of what autism are, ADHD are, as much as I like to think I know what I'm talking about, I realize there's so much more I need to learn. I say that as a parent, and as a therapist. I had an awesome conversation with a psychologist from Australia, Leanne, that you're going to get to know and hear about, and how we as parents can foster our our own capabilities to help our children, help the family dynamics when it comes to both of these diagnoses. What questions we can possibly ask both to the school to help us understand, or the professionals out there that there can be better communication with, how to communicate better within the family, different siblings, from us as parents of the siblings, and also to the siblings to each other. So I think there are so many different amazing little tidbits that I was able to pick up from here. Obviously, we're going to be posting this both on the podcast. We're going to have some short clips we're going to make as well this time, because I think it's really important for some of the really, really awesome pieces of treasure that Leanne shared with us. So I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please feel free to reach out to us on any of our social medias, which are posted below, or you can also send us an email at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Please don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Send us a comment. We'd like to respond to everyone. We got some really awesome guests because of you guys, and that should just continue for this whole entire season too. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, so Leanne, I'm so happy we're finally having a chance to meet. There are so many different areas from your expertise that I think we can really gain from. Maybe you just give like a little bit of like a background of like where you're from and the things that you specifically work on, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty and roll up our sleeves over here.
Yeah, sure. My name's Leanne. I'm a psychologist in Brisbane, Australia, and I've worked with families for 20 years or so, and usually it's families where a child is developing differently, so either has a disability or a brain type like ADHD and autism. I work with kids right through from, toddler years to teenage years, and I love it. It's so fun. It's different every day, but, I really enjoy the opportunity to help kids be able to change the course of their lives really by having their needs met. And a big part of what I do too in having needs met is working with parents because children are dependent on their parents and their environment. And it's easier for parents to change what they do than for children to change. So yeah, that's a big part of what I do as well.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so I have like a little bit of a different philosophy on that, and we're going to get back to that regarding who can change more, so to speak. And I think it's a really good discussion. And I just wanted to back up. There's like you've dedicated your life specifically to talking and working with children and their families. Was there like a specific like moment or like a series of moments that like sort of crystallized this calling for you? And like, what is it about this work that's like really, really passionate for you?
Yeah, I think there were a few leading up to that point. I had, when I was young, a really mild physical condition that it's mild in comparison to what I see other kids having, but I certainly had that experience of being different from others and couldn't do what other kids could do and left out a little bit. And I think that's really what's drawn me to working with children who potentially feel that way. But then in high school, I wanted to be a teacher, and then had this realization, I think, that psychology could be like teaching, but about life rather than academics.
Subjects, right?
Yeah. And when I graduated, my first position was working with adults who were incarcerated and had drug and alcohol problems. And I did like that work, but it really gave me this sense that I could help a lot earlier on in people's lives and have a bigger impact. So those are the three things I'd say that drew me into this perfect space I'm in for me now.
That's amazing. I actually relate to you in so many ways regarding where I started out working with people coming from the judicial system and the families when it comes to things that they've been dealing with, specifically drug and alcohol, and
Mm,
realizing, okay, so where's this coming from? Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Which is obviously the question that has been talked about for years. So
yeah,
you
that's right.
and then looking at it as like, okay, so there's a family dynamic. Oh, okay, so that means there's kids involved. So let's sort of go back on the roads and obviously talking about developmental trauma and educational
Mm,
trauma, which I'm sure is a subject you and I can spend a long time on. But
probably, yeah.
keeping it specifically to this topic and talking about the ADHD and autism. So, how do you? Well, I guess really we should start with. Can you please explain to us what exactly are the two different diagnoses and how are they different from each other?
Yeah, it's a good question. They so I'll start with ADHD. I guess it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but and we talk about it a lot in terms of attention, but it's really a disorder in being able to self-regulate across a range of areas. So it's regulating attention, but it's also regulating emotions
Mm.
and behavior as well, which is where that hyperactivity or impulsivity comes from. It's incredibly genetic. And so lots of times there's still myths out there that it's kind of because of parenting. Um, and, there are nuances around all of this stuff, but on the whole, it's a pretty genetic condition. And so it means a child's brain is just developing along a different path. And there's some parts like that regulation in which they're behind other kids of the same age. So that's where I think parenting can come in to reduce expectations that they have on their children, or of their children. Um, and autism is a condition that's different. It's mostly characterized by social communication differences. So lots of times it's nonverbal communication that's different, and that's things like eye contact or facial expressions and use of gestures. And there's also an area of behavior that's different as well, and it's usually restricted behavior is the technical term, but what that means really is a narrow field of interest in some things and potentially repeating certain behaviors over and over. Sensory difficulties or differences in processing goes in there as well. So it's quite different to ADHD. Again, because of that different way of developing, I think parents can do things differently that makes life smoother. Lots of times the conditions overlap. So kids will have both ADHD and autism. So they are different, but it's very common that kids will have both. And that's why the two get confused a lot.
Yes, yes, they do. And I just to summarize a lot of what you're saying. So when it comes to autism, it has a lot more to do with their communication within how they go about things. But when it comes to ADHD, it's more about their regulation when it comes to how
Yeah.
they go about things. So I think that's a
Yeah.
very big difference. And I think when it comes to parents being involved, which we'll get into in more detail, I'm curious, what can parents ask, whether it's to the school so that they can know the differences that are happening, and also regarding professionals and doctors that are helping with diagnoses, medications, and treatment plans. How can parents, what questions can they ask the professionals as well?
Yeah. Do you mean in terms of when they first go to seek help or
Yes, yeah.
any? Yeah. I think the approach I take too is that within these conditions, kids are going to have strengths and challenges as well, and not all kids are the same. So I'd really be asking about what challenges their child is having. So at school, potentially, you can ask what is difficult for them throughout the day. Are they having trouble regulating themselves in the classroom? Whether that's getting out of their seat a lot and all of that kind of stuff, um, and difficulty in the playground. And because I think the more parents know about what a child's day like is at school, the more that can help when they're then talking to, a medical professional, whether it's a pediatrician or a psychologist or somebody else. And then the questions to ask, I guess, and these are common things parents ask me is this just typical for a child of that age, or is it outside the realms of typical? Because it's so hard to tell as a parent what's normal and what's not. And expectations of kids change as they grow older. So, yeah, finding out what kids are doing at school and then asking, is that typical or normal, or is that outside what you'd usually see, I think are the first ways to understand whether you've got a typical child or whether they're developing differently.
Yeah. Okay. That's I think very, very helpful as a parent and as someone that works in this field. So I really appreciate that. And you're talking a lot about, and I know a lot of your work, and I want to get into also like your treatment plans and how you go about things, and why the online world is something that is important when it comes to the treatments and stuff. But let's focus on it for a second regarding the family aspect of things and the family dynamics and the parents. So you talk about before how parents are the ones that are able to change a lot more for probably various reasons, whether it's a child not even understanding or knowing what it is that they have to do and work on, and how they have to go about things. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, what is it about the parents that the responsibility may be on them, but they also have a responsibility to be there for the family, but yet change in a certain way, but not change too much where everything is going to be all haywire. So how do they go about doing that in a healthy, structured way that's best for that child?
Yeah, the reason I say parents can change is, faster, I think, is because any of us who've ever tried to change our behavior or a habit know how difficult it is. And then if we expect that of a child who's still developing those things like problem solving and, grit and determination and all of that stuff, it's harder for them. I think how I focus on it with parents is that often with ADHD and autism, or even if your child's got some just challenging behaviours for whatever reason, understanding them is the first step to being able to be empathic. And I always say that empathy then leads to patience as well, which we all need as parents. So understanding your child, but also the particular difficulties they might have and what goes along with that really helps. And then when I'm talking about change, it's not necessarily, big change of who you are as a person. It's just changing the parenting strategies that you use. So there are some that will be more effective for kids with ADHD or autism. And because if you can, change some of the strategies you're using to be more effective, then you're going to have a calmer household. And really the goal is that it buys enough time in a calm household for your child to learn a lot of the skills. They can still learn it, but they just haven't yet. So you're supporting them and at the same time teaching them, and they're developing and learning skills, which will help in the long run, but they're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think based on what you're saying, I understand a lot more regarding the parents changing and being easier for them to change in a certain way. Before I comment on that specifically, so I'm reminded of there's a mentor, someone that I followed. I've got to speak to him a number of times. His name is Dr. Jacob Ham, who is a psychologist based out of New York City. Runs the Child Trauma Center. He's written some amazing books. He has some amazing videos. And one of the things that you were saying reminded me of something that he talks about. And I'll try to post a link in the show notes regarding this amazing video regarding the concept of a child learning. And when they're learning, it's sort of like, let's say, picture this big boulder that they're trying to push. And they have to get from here to here, from beginning of first grade to the end of first grade. Now, if we're going to make the situation a little tougher for them, so the house is going to be tough, or we're going to be screaming at them more, and they're going to be unorganized, and they're not going to be able to be regulated themselves. So imagine them trying to push up that boulder up a hill. And now you want to teach them things. So you want them to retain information. It's not going to happen. So it's our job as parents, which is the thing is what you're saying, to make sure that we have a flat plane that we have a playing field that is easy for them to roll that ball they need to get throughout that school year, and to be that
Yeah.
support system for them. And I think that's a very, very big part of what you're saying, which the truth is, babe, from my philosophy, how I look at it now and talk about it in my practice, is not that much different. We're all familiar with the concept of a younger tree is a lot easier to bend in a direction that you want as opposed to an older
Yes.
tree.
Yep.
So when we talk about adults, we are the older tree. And in many ways, it's much harder for us to change. But if we
Yeah,
have the
that's true.
realization of what it is that we need to do regarding helping out our child, which is what you started with saying, is that our job is not just to be that authoritarian parent, or that maybe some situations a helicopter parent that we're all guilty of being
Mm.
sometimes. We have
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that we are being a parent for the child for what they need. And
Yeah.
that might change for that 5, 6, 7-year-old kid that is on the spectrum of being autistic, for that older sister that's 3, 4 years older that is getting straight A's in school, and is that perfect kid, gets out of bed the first time you go to their room, cleans their room, doesn't leave socks on the floor. And then you have
Yeah.
the second child that is a little different and needing a little bit different parenting from her care, or their caregivers. And I think that's an important thing. I think that's what you're talking about, of the parents are able to change in that situation. Because, well, when I know when I'm trying to learn something new, a line that I like talking about is, I don't even know what it is I don't know, so help me understand so that I can know things. And in
Yeah.
a way, a lot of these children that are going through things, that they're changing and they're learning just on a little bit of a different path, they don't even know what it is that they don't know what and how to do certain things. So it's
Yeah,
our
that's
job
right.
as parents to make sure that we're able to go ahead and get them to that place, leading them there. Now, with
Yes.
my example, how I'm saying it, my question to you is, and this is something that I struggle with as a parent as well, and I think it's important for everyone out there to realize, is that uh, as a psychotherapist, that doesn't mean I have all the answers,
No, exactly.
because
Yep.
there are so many things that we go through as parents, that we're also fallible, just like everybody else out there. So I think this is an area that I know I like talking about, because I know this is an area I need to work on, is when you have those two different children at home, how do you go about that communication, between the parent and the child, or the children, that obviously have to be a little bit different because each child needs something different, but yet also between the two children, because their
Mm.
communication could sometimes be a little bit, could be a little more animosity in the ear, a little more jealousy, a little more heaviness regarding, like, oh, you're treated differently, so therefore I'm going to treat you differently. And how
Mm-hmm.
can we as parents regulate that communication between the siblings and between the parents?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the parent-child one is a little bit easier to talk about, but the sibling one, yeah, it's what we all need, right? Because and this is why I think parents have such a big impact, because as psychologists and I'm not sure how you practice, it might be a little bit differently, but in psychology, typically, if we're working with one child, it's about that child and their experience in the family. But then parents are the ones who need to be able to help all the kids and their co-parents and everybody. So they have a really big role. Um, I think how I do it is talk a lot about, first of all, recognizing the differences each child has and trying to find a way to match what you're giving to those needs. It is a good one. I think if I give a practical example, it might be better. I've got one of those older sister type figures in my house, and it's a good morning with a hug every morning. And I have another child as well who's not like that, and so it's the connection is really different. So I don't use as much words. And I might just do a high five in the morning or something like that, because it's just has that different expression of love and connection. So I just kind of have to adapt what I'm doing for each individual child. But when with children together, I try and explain it to each child that their sibling is just built a bit differently, or they're wired a bit differently, and so they need different things. And I think that kind of, again, it's about understanding so that kids can have a bit more empathy with each other as well. So it might be,
Mm.
for example, yeah, but he finds it hard to do this. And so that's why this happens. And it's not necessarily about solving all of the sibling problems, but it's more, I see my job as more to kind of try and help that perspective taking that they can do with each other.
And I think that goes really far when we have that open communication with them and we explain to them that,
Mm,
like, your younger brother has a hard time doing certain things. You know what? Sometimes it's like so easy for you to just take your dirty clothes and put it into the hamper and divide it by
yep.
colors because you're like really organized. Like he doesn't know how
Mm,
to do that. So maybe you can help me teach him how to divide those things, which I think is what you're saying, which comes down to something that we've talked about this podcast all constantly. And I probably, as much as I would like to have an agenda every single time, I realize there are some universal truths when it comes to parenting.
right. Yeah.
One of them being communication, which is what we're talking
Yes.
about, and having that as a focal point for how we're going to be dealing with different situations. Obviously, this is something that I talk about in my practice, whether I like it or not, and I'm sure it's something you talk about it as well. Opening
Mm,
up and enhancing that communication. And I think what you're saying, Leanne, overall is communication is going to look different between different kids, and that's okay because each of our
yeah.
kids are different. And our job as parents is to make sure that we are doing the best for what that child needs. And someone might need something different than someone
Yeah.
else. And I think
Yep.
that's really important. How would you go about explaining um, a diagnosis to a child regarding this is what your sibling is going through? Or is that maybe something that might not be important for them to know? And it's just like, we're going to treat them a little bit different than we treated you because of what he needs differently. How do you go about dealing with
Mm.
that within the family dynamics?
I think I usually do advocate for parents to explain it in terms of the diagnosis because I think that, you know, it gives a bit of that understanding of why things are different to a child. Um, and there's lots of books to use to talk about these things. So if
Good.
kids are little, or even for older kids, there's lots of books about explaining conditions like ADHD and autism to children. And I think that's something that I use a lot because books, then as parents, the book has all the information in there. You don't have to know it and remember it and make sure you've covered it all. But then it's it's a way to set up the opportunity for your children to ask you questions as
Mm.
well. And I talk about it a lot in terms of a brain type or wiring, and they're just everybody's different, but with a diagnosis, it means it's maybe more the difference is bigger, and explaining that that's the way a child's brain kind of works and is wired, and that takes it. Why I think that's important is it removes it from being a kind of moral issue or something. If someone can't get things done or is disorganized, and sometimes that A plus student will see that as just a failure of being a good person. And
Yeah.
explaining that the brain is different can really take that piece out of it. And yeah, I think it's good to prompt questions as well, so that then if, you know, I generally tend to find that kids will ask different questions at different ages. And so how much to tell them can be guided by the questions that they ask you, really.
Yeah, and I love that you're saying that, and I think something that I talk about in my practice and in my home all the time is that there's no such thing as a bad question except for the one not asked.
Yeah.
And the motto, so to speak, is more like is ABC, like always be curious. Something we talk about on this podcast a lot. Again, also something in the practice that's talked about. When it comes to asking questions, I think there is no bad question. So if a
Mm,
child's like, okay, so why is little Johnny needing a little more attention or needing a little more help putting this stuff in the hamper? Why can't I? That hamper is what we would call the laundry bin here in America. So,
yeah. Yep.
so I think that's something that when a child asks a question, it's like, oh, that's an awesome question. Well, are you able to go ahead and differentiate between the colors and between the whites? So then,
Mm.
okay, so then is that something that, maybe he might have a hard time with? And let's ask him. Yeah, he has a hard time with colors because the way he processes and he doesn't understand that different things go into different bins. Oh, okay, so there's a difference between you and him. I'm glad you asked that
Mm-hmm.
question. And when we try to promote that, it's going to be on us parents to make sure that we give the invitation for those questions to be asked. And I think
Yeah.
that's really, really important. And I do agree that being able to tell a child that, yeah, your younger sibling has something that he's working with that makes things a little bit harder for him, can also be part of them comprehending what's going on. So if there's a book out there that's going to be beneficial, and there are plenty out there, and maybe we'll post a
Mm.
couple, and if there's one or two that you recommend, we'll post in the show notes as well, that could be beneficial for a parent explaining autism, explaining ADHD to a child when they have those visions within their own mind. It helps them comprehend, like, oh, okay, so things are wired differently for me than they are for them, so therefore things have to be
Yeah.
different. And I think that's really important. Very, very similar, but obviously not the same when it comes to, if let's say, parents are having a second child, and their older one is about 3-4 years old, and
Mm-hmm.
that child really wants to help, and they're trying to bring bottles and
Yeah.
they're trying to bring
Yep.
diapers, because they know that that little baby can't do those things. And when it's
Exactly.
talked about, like, yeah, so my baby brother, who's 4 now, who should know that, this is where we put the garbage after we finish, eating, that, okay, he can't do that. And that same
Mm-hmm.
concept, I think that could be something, but parents have to be very, very careful and aware of what they're saying and how they're saying it to a child, and make sure that that child comprehends it. So ask them questions that they have to repeat back to you, like, do you understand what I'm saying? Can you say it to me, so that they sort of know? And I think that's like really, really important. And I'm sure along the way that you've done this, there's been so many different transformations within families that you've seen how they are able to enhance and like grow together. Is there like maybe like a specific story, or like something that stands out to you regarding like a family's understanding, or like through like the developmental part of a child that you've seen to the better? And what does that process look like as you've sort of seen that happen?
Probably the one that quickly comes to mind is a young boy who had real difficulty managing emotions, and that was part of autism, and it kind of led to, when I talk about difficulty managing emotions, what that looks like to a family is a tantrum or a meltdown, or really significant dysregulation is what we would call it, but you would see it as losing it, really. Um, and it turned to the point of, saying things like, I just wish I wasn't here, because the emotions were too big to handle. And that had a really big impact on him, obviously, in his life, and parenting was stressful, but older siblings as well. Particularly when he was moving to high school that they were already attending, and they were really concerned that, he's going to
Mm.
be embarrassing at school, and all of this kind of thing. And so, um, I worked with him on the actual skills of managing the emotions, and his parents did amazing work with trying to, they added a little bit of structure into the home, which helped, and things like clear boundaries about, so the structure was, a plan for what's going to happen each day, and the boundaries were things like when screen time could happen and when it couldn't, and expectations about how he was to speak to his siblings and family, and that what it was, no swearing, and all of those kind of things, and were really consistent with recognizing the good, things he did and the times when it was difficult, but he managed it well. And so they did lots of recognition of his strengths and his efforts, and that kind of thing. They explained to their older children as well what was happening, because this was a newish diagnosis around that late primary school age. And because the siblings were a couple of years older, they did some of their own online research and
Mm.
understood. Because I think the other thing too is lots of times, particularly with autism, kids already have an image in their mind of what autism is, and it's usually a quite extreme version of autism, maybe where there's lots of, no communication and lots of behavior challenges. And so then they kind of don't see that in their own sibling. But once these kids had read a little more and done their research and kind of thought, okay, well, yeah, I understand it now. They ended up still arguing every now and again, of course, but the support that then they gave him was amazing. They would do things like help him talk through what he's going to do when he meets a new person at school and the new school, and where can you go for help and all of this kind of stuff. So the work I'd been doing with him, then they kind of took on their own, almost like a role model or mentorship role in the
Wow.
family. The parents were still doing the parenting, but they were like, look, I can help you learn some of this stuff. Like, I'm a high schooler, I know. Um, yeah. And I
That's
think that's,
amazing.
it is amazing. And it's that particular dynamic too of older sisters and a younger child. I know that's stereotypical, but I think, they were naturally really caring, but it was just that understanding of what he was going through and why that helped them kind of, be able to move past their annoyance at all of the behaviors to be able to support him.
Yeah, I think that's every parent's dream when we can have siblings working together without us, and I'm looking forward to that day. And
Yeah.
hopefully, that I think that's something that as you talk about the parents' consistency and things, I'm sure that played a big part of it as well. And you're right when you talk about these certain stigmatism, both regarding that younger sibling and then regarding the older ones. Like, yeah, I'm related to that guy,
Mm.
but I don't want to know him. So there's a wanting to distance, and that's not healthy as well. And for so many different reasons, I think there are so many different areas within both the autism and the ADHD world that I think there's like a lot of confusion, like especially when it comes to where access to information could be limited. But like, what are some of like the persistent myths about these specific diagnoses that you've seen, and why is it that they continue to linger even in the age of information that we have today?
Oh, I think, well, yeah, I'm not sure why they persist into, I guess, maybe I've just realized it as I'm talking. I was going to say, I'm not sure why those stereotypes persist, but maybe it's like what you said before about the younger tree versus the older tree. The older trees don't bend so much, and so we kind of hold on to our beliefs sometimes, even in the face of new information. And I do find there's a generational difference too. The younger people coming through are much more aware and accepting of difference and change, in my experience, than potentially their grandparents are. The biggest myth I think that is still around about ADHD is that it's just poor parenting. And that's really difficult because then parents don't want to seek help because they just worry that it's them. But the research kind of shows the opposite, and in that when a child has ADHD, then that is what changes the parenting, because the traditional parenting you have been using and that worked maybe with your older child suddenly is not as useful. And so the child's acting really differently. So you just naturally change how you do the parenting. And it's not
Yeah.
necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not necessarily a good thing if you're just in the dark about what you're doing. But that's the biggest myth about that one. And with autism, I think the biggest myth too is that people still have that idea of, almost caricature of autism in their mind, and it's somebody who doesn't use eye contact and keeps to themselves and, can't really
Completely
communicate well.
unsocial. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot more difference in autism. Um, all of these things that we're talking about, like social, or even if you just pick about, what you said about being a loner, the social experience, it's not really the social skills. It's even like the desire to be social is on its own spectrum there. So you will have people who don't want to be around other people, but then you'll have people who really do, but they're not quite sure how and they don't quite have the skills to do it, and everybody in between. Um, so it's a lot more nuanced than we think, and people can use eye contact and communicate and still be autistic. So yeah, that makes it really tricky to understand
Oh,
because
for
it's
sure.
such a group with so much difference within it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And and just to like finish off then for a follow-up question on that is, have have you seen situations where this is something that could be diagnosed, like you were just mentioning with this boy, a little bit later, like a little bit older? It doesn't have to be that like young child still in like those early developmental stages. Is this something for both of these diagnoses that could be diagnosed in adulthood or young adulthood? And
Yeah.
are there things that we can do to prevent that from waiting so long to be diagnosed?
Yeah, it is. It is something that can be diagnosed in adulthood. And in fact, it's common, I think, a lot more in Australia at the moment anyway. And in my work with kids, it's very common that as parents are talking about their child's challenges and we're doing assessment they're being diagnosed with ADHD or autism, parents will say, I was just like that at school, particularly with ADHD, I think. And then through that experience of having their child diagnosed, then they will end up seeking help and potentially being diagnosed as well. And I think it shows the difference in knowledge from generation to generation and the ability and the willingness to seek help as well. Um, and the knowledge wasn't around there potentially for a lot of adults when they were young, so they're not being diagnosed. They weren't. Um,
Right.
but but that's where I think children are being recognised and supported a lot earlier now. I think the advice would be to just seek help when you're unsure about your child, and it doesn't have to be. The worst thing that happens is that somebody says to you, "Look, I think it's all like pretty normal, standard for this age. It is hard. I recognize that," but then you're just reassured, and there's no problem. But the difference in picking up a child early versus picking up a child late makes a really big difference for the child. So you may as well seek some support as soon as you have questions or as soon as you have worries.
Yeah, and I think there are so many things that we don't know about the field as this in many ways as human beings have been around for so long, and the concept of being diagnosed for these things and most things in psychology is like sort of brand new. So it's
Mm,
not like even people that are this is their expertise and they've been doing this for decades doesn't necessarily mean that we have all the answers yet. So
yeah, that's right.
there's constant information coming out, and I think that's really important for to understand as parents that yeah, there's going to be some questions that I don't have the answer to. You're not going to get the answer to right away. That's okay, and we want to be able to
Hmm.
find the right treatment and the right way to be going ahead and dealing with our kids. But sometimes it's going to take a little bit of time, and the access, whether it's online or in person, to proper treatment could be difficult. And I know that's something that you've really taken a stance on. Maybe you could talk about it for a minute regarding moving your practice online and being something you're trying to reach people in rural areas. And I'm curious if there's a message that you'd want to give to people that might not have the access, whether it's in person or professionally in general, to seek help for people within their family that are dealing with these diagnoses. Where can they go? What would be like the top two or three bullets that you might give them to find and give them the guidance for this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the reason I've moved a lot online, you're right, is because we have a big space in Australia and we're some people are in the middle and there's really not much else around. I think the internet's really great for that. I think um, probably, I would say, firstly, like there's lots of government-based information in Australia. That's true. I imagine it's the same in America as well.
Pretty much, yeah.
Um, yeah, because I think it's good to get reputable information about what's happening, and so lots of times, so that's my first advice, I guess, is look for reputable information, whether it's from governments or even universities as well. Lots of our universities or colleges in Australia have programs that parents can do around
Good
certain
resources.
issues, whether it's, anxiety or that kind of thing. So I'd say to look for some, good quality information. The second thing is to see if there is a community that you can find online as well, whether that's people who, local groups where you can ask other parents things, or parenting groups as well, so that you've got a community of people to ask. And then the third point might be, if you do have concerns, to see if there's somebody that you can speak with online as well, even if it's just to reassure you that everything's okay, but at least then they can help you kind of. I think that's the hardest point as a parent, is that feeling unsure of whether you're doing the right thing or not. And if they can help reassure you or set you on a path where you feel confident, that's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that everything you're saying will take what I was saying before regarding, sometimes I don't even know what it is I don't know. Well, it'll
Yeah.
take those questions out of it. So it just gives you a starting point. And it's okay if you go to one university website, or if you go to one government website and you're not liking what you're hearing, or it's too hard to navigate. Okay, so go somewhere else.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's
that's
something that I
right.
talk about in my practice a lot of even sometimes getting rejected or trying something that doesn't work, whether you're trying to implement new skills in from a therapeutic modality, or you're trying to teach mindfulness or grounding or something. What we do that doesn't work is still something that we learned that doesn't work. So then let's try
That's right.
something else. And I think
Yep.
that's a really good lesson. And as a parents are trying to find information, and there's a wealth of information out there, and I think your examples are great. I think that's really something that we should all realize. Again, I'm saying that both as a parent and as a psychotherapist, that it's
Mm,
something that that we can really learn more about, and just go online, find something, and if it's not working for you, that's okay. Try something else. And to
yep.
your point of there being so many resources out there, what is it about this field specifically when it comes to child psychology and like family support in general that you are excited about going forward? And what would you also like to see more of in the field in itself?
I think what's exciting to me is there's a lot more acceptance about difference now. And I think that's really healthy for everybody. So I'm really excited about that. I think, I think for me still, it's I would like to see people be able to connect more, and particularly when I'm thinking about rural people as well, um, being able to find a community is really important, and that's something that can be really hard. Um, I think, what would I like to see be different? Um, Probably like, it's maybe not in the field of psychology, but I think for just parenting in general to be recognized as a little bit more of a difficult part of our lives and a really big commitment. And if that, as a society, we recognize that, I think then things like the flexibility that we need at work sometimes to be able to respond to our kids, even if it's needing to be around for a bit more for a few weeks or something like that, would be available. So I think a recognition of how important a job parenting is would be great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because like I tell people, as much as I guess probably because of what I do for a living regarding parenting and working
Mm,
with a lot of teenagers and that communication aspect of things, I enjoy a really good book when it comes to parenting, and I have plenty of them. But I tell everyone is that there's no such thing as a book on parenting. So
yeah.
it's about realizing that it's going to take commitment. One of the things like with my wife and her siblings when they were dating to get married, and their parents, my in-laws would say to them like, okay, you ready to date, like you ready to get married, are you ready to have a family, are you ready to wake up 2 o'clock in the morning even though you just went to bed at 1 o'clock, are you ready
Right.
to do those things? If you're not ready to do that, don't start dating for marriage. And
Hmm.
they sort of set that tone in their heads regarding this is what it's going to take, and it's a lifetime commitment. And I don't think anyone can say it's going to get easier, it's going to get different. And
Yes.
when it comes to dealing with so many different things, when it comes to these two specific diagnoses that we've been talking about today, or anything, you're gonna have magical moments, and you're gonna have moments that you're like, oh my god, I need to go away for like a year, and I'll come back, and
Yeah.
that's gonna happen, and that's okay, and it's amazing. But I think to your point, and just like echoing that, saying that, yeah, it's a job that if people should really know what they're getting themselves into, because the more you get yourself into it, the more committed you'll be, like those parents that you were talking about. So I'm so glad you said
Yeah.
that, and I'm so glad that we got a chance just for a few minutes, because I'll be very honest with you, Leanne. I prepared probably about 25 questions to talk to you, and I probably only got through like 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
Because there are so many things when it comes to these two things specifically that we can talk about for hours. But I'm
Mm.
curious, as we sort of wrap it up over here before we have like a few rapid fire questions for you. Is there anything regarding these two specific diagnoses that we've been talking about that maybe you want to leave us a message that we didn't really get a chance to like touch on today?
I think we touched on a lot of it actually. I think it's just about, it's probably just to reiterate that the more you can understand about it, the more you'll instinctively, I guess, work out what your child needs, and then you can provide that through your parenting. Yeah.
I could not have said it better myself, and that's something that I talk about in my practice, and my wife and I talk about it all the time. That we're trying to
Mm.
do. Where can people find more of Leanne?
My website's the best place. So it's leannetran.com.au. And yeah, that's got links to everything. I try to provide lots of information for families as well. And have a podcast called Parent Like a Psychologist. So, like you, I want to kind of share as much information as I can with people. And the links are all on the website there, as well as, information for parents about how they can adapt their parenting to things like ADHD and autism.
That's amazing. And we will have all these links in the show notes if anyone wants to get in touch with Leanne and the amazing work that she's doing. As we finish up over here, just make it a little bit late because it's a little bit of like a heavier conversation that we had today. Nothing
Mm.
crazy, but I think something that can be it can be arduous to to be dealing with a task and this on your mind. It's already on our mind. Our kids are on our mind constantly. So
Yeah.
just like lighten up a little bit here. I'm curious if, let's say, there's someone in history that you would like to have lunch with that is not alive
Mm.
anymore. Who would that person be?
Oh, it's not alive anymore. That's made it a little tricky. um, my mind's running through all the famous old psychologists that have contributed to research and that kind of thing. But who would it be?
Uh,
I don't. It would probably be an author. I would say not a psychologist. It would
okay.
be an author like one of the Bronte sisters or something like that. I think. Because I really love to read, and I think like the power of telling stories through books is amazing. So yeah, I would want to meet, say Jane Austen or
Mm.
Emily Bronte, maybe from way back in that era where women were just starting to be able to write and do things for themselves, and they've made these works that then have lasted way beyond their lifetime. Yeah, that's who I would pick, I think.
Okay, so on that
Yeah.
topic of authors, I'm curious, based on what where our conversation went today, is there either a book, a podcast, besides for your own, or maybe some other YouTube video that you would recommend people can get more information on this topic?
Yeah, there's one if around ADHD. The book I recommend a lot is by Russell Barkley, who's
Oh,
an American researcher. You know him, obviously. But it's called 12 Principles for Raising a Child with ADHD. And I think it's just so easy
it's a
to
staple.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. So I find myself recommending that a lot. Yep.
That's awesome. And I highly recommend going on YouTube and finding some of his talks that he's had all over the place.
Mm.
And he is great. He's easy to listen to and he's a wealth of information. So great call. And you might even have been the first person to recommend him, but thank you for
Oh, okay.
recommending him.
Yep. Yeah.
So I think he's absolutely amazing. My last question to you, Leanne, is if you could think of an everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have as a mom, what would that be?
Mm. That is such a good question. Just one? I only get one. um, I think it would be having a sensor that kind of turns off or really helps me tune in when my kids are needing something from me. I think because I will often get interrupted and I find it hard to know the difference between the times I should put my work down and listen to them and the times that I should
Yeah.
say, look, just not right now. I think that's really hard to know for sure. That's something I
So,
struggle with anyway.
so the superpower of time and allocating time properly.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good
Mm.
one. And yeah, I could use that for sure. Well, this has been absolute
Mm.
pleasure. Thank you so much for a few minutes today, Leanne.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.